Emma Blackwood clutched her coffee mug tightly, her eyes fixed on the old photograph spread out on her grandmother's kitchen table. The sepia-toned image showed a family picnic, her ancestors, taken on a warm summer day in 1927, outside their farmhouse in Coldwater, Kansas. For weeks, Emma had been digitizing her grandmother's collection of family photographs for a genealogy project, but this particular image had stopped her cold. "I don't understand," Emma whispered, her finger hovering over the strange anomaly. When she'd scanned the photograph at high resolution and zoomed in on her computer, she discovered something impossible. A translucent figure standing behind her great-great-grandmother Sarah, with its pale, elongated fingers resting on the shoulder of 3-year-old Ruth, the family's youngest child, who, according to family law, had disappeared without a trace just 2 months after this photograph was taken. "Grandma," Emma called out, her voice unsteady. "Can you come look at something?" Margaret Blackwood, 84 years old but still sharp as a tack, shuffled into the kitchen, her arthritis slowing her movements. "What is it, dear?" "This picture from the picnic. Did you ever notice anything strange about it?" Margaret adjusted her glasses and peered at the image. Her face drained of color as she stared at the spot Emma indicated. "Good Lord," she whispered, crossing herself instinctively. "No, I never saw that before. We didn't have the technology to examine photos this closely back then." Emma pulled up the digital scan on her laptop. "Look at this when I zoom in." She enlarged the image, revealing the ethereal figure more clearly. A tall, gaunt form with hollow eyes and a mouth stretched impossibly wide, its fingers wrapped around little Ruth's shoulder. "What is that, Grandma?" Margaret sank heavily into a chair. "I don't know, but this picture was taken just before Ruth vanished. My mother, your great-grandmother Helen, was just a child herself then, but she told me stories about Ruth, how they searched for weeks, how my great-grandmother Sarah was never the same afterward." Emma felt a chill, despite the warm Kansas spring day outside. "There's something else," she said, scrolling through other digitized photos. "I've been finding anomalies in other pictures too, always near Ruth, like something was watching her, following her." Margaret's hands trembled as she reached for Emma's. "There's a box in the attic, Sarah's journal. I've never read it. My mother forbade it. Said some things were best left forgotten. Maybe it's time we found out what really happened to Ruth." As they spoke, neither noticed the shadow that passed by the kitchen window, too tall and too thin to be human, or the faint sound of childish laughter carried on the wind outside. The attic of Margaret's farmhouse was stifling in the late afternoon heat. Dust particles danced in the rays of sunlight streaming through the single window as Emma and her grandmother searched through decades of family possessions. The old floorboards creaked underfoot, each step releasing the musty scent of forgotten memories. "It should be in that trunk," Margaret said, pointing to a weathered leather case tucked beneath the eaves. "My mother put it there years ago, said it was never to be opened." Emma dragged the trunk into the light, the brass latches tarnished with age. The lock had long since rusted away, making it easy to pry open the lid. Inside lay neatly folded clothing from another era, carefully preserved photographs, and beneath it all a leather-bound journal tied with a faded ribbon. "This must be it," Emma said, carefully lifting the journal. The leather was cracked with age, the pages yellowed and brittle. She untied the ribbon with gentle fingers and opened to the first page. "Property of Sarah Ann Blackwood, 1927. Emma and Margaret brought the journal downstairs, where the light was better. Seated at the kitchen table, Emma began to read aloud from entries dating back to the spring of 1927. "April 15th, 1927. Ruth has been talking about her friend again. An imaginary companion, I thought at first, as children often have. But there's something troubling in the way she describes this friend. The tall man, she calls him, the one who watches from the trees. James says I'm being foolish, that it's just a child's fancy, but I've started to notice the chill that comes to the rooms where Ruth plays alone. May 3rd, 1927, found Ruth standing at her bedroom window at 3 in the morning, whispering to someone outside. When I asked who she was talking to, she said, "The tall man is hungry, Mama. He says soon he'll take me to where the others are." I've started locking her bedroom door at night. Margaret's face had grown increasingly pale as Emma read. "I never knew any of this," she whispered. June 8th, 1927. We had our family picnic today. Ruth seemed normal, laughing and playing with her siblings. I almost believed I'd imagined all my concerns until I saw her stop suddenly in the middle of a game, staring toward the old oak tree at the edge of our property. No one was there, but she waved and smiled as if greeting an old friend. When James took our photograph, I felt a coldness pass through me, like someone walking over my grave. Emma turned the page, her hands trembling slightly. The next entry was dated July 12th, 1927, the day before Ruth's disappearance. July 12th, 1927. I found claw marks on the outside of Ruth's window this morning. James says it must be from the branch of the oak tree, but that tree is 20 feet from the house. Ruth told me, "The tall man is getting impatient, Mama. He's coming to take me home." God help me, I'm afraid to sleep tonight. The final entry was a single line, written in a shaky, almost frantic hand. July 13th, 1927. He took her. God forgive me. I saw him and did nothing. Emma closed the journal, a heavy silence filling the kitchen. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the yard. "Grandma," Emma said quietly, "what happened after Ruth disappeared?" Margaret stared out the window at the old oak tree, still standing at the edge of the property after all these years. The official story was that she wandered off and was lost. They searched for weeks. Sarah, she had a breakdown, was institutionalized for a time. When she came home, she refused to speak of Ruth ever again. As darkness fell outside, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching the house, watching them, from the shadows of the ancient oak tree. The next morning, Emma sat at her laptop, the digital scan of the picnic photograph open on her screen. She'd barely slept, her dreams haunted by images of a tall, emaciated figure reaching for her with impossibly long fingers. Determined to understand what had happened to her ancestor, she began researching historical records from Coldwater, Kansas in the 1920s. The local historical society's online archives yielded little about Ruth's disappearance, just a small newspaper article reporting a missing child and the subsequent search. But as Emma dug deeper, she discovered something unsettling. Ruth wasn't the only child to vanish in Coldwater during that time. Between 1922 and 1929, 5 children had disappeared without a trace from the small farming community. Each case remained unsolved, each child between the ages of 3 and 6 years old. The disappearances had stopped as suddenly as they began, with no explanation. Emma called the Coldwater Historical Society and spoke with an elderly archivist named Howard Jensen. "Those disappearances," Howard said, his voice crackling over the phone. "My grandfather was sheriff back then. He never solved the cases, and it haunted him until his dying day. There was talk, though, rumors about a drifter who passed through town around that time. Unusually tall and thin, they said. Some of the children reported seeing a strange man watching them before they vanished." Emma felt her skin prickle. "Did anyone ever catch this drifter?" "No," Howard replied. "But my grandfather kept a file of witness statements. Most folks thought the witnesses were just hysterical, seeing things that weren't there. One woman claimed the man she saw wasn't human at all, said his arms were too long, his face distorted. She was dismissed as crazy, of course. Do you still have those files? Somewhere in our archives. I could dig them up if you'd like to come by." That afternoon, Emma drove into Coldwater, a town that had changed little in the past century. The Historical Society occupied an old Victorian house on Main Street, its rooms filled with artifacts from the town's past. Howard, a man in his 70s, with a shock of white hair, greeted her at the door. "I found my grandfather's personal notes," he said, leading her to a table where a weathered leather folder lay open. These weren't official police records, more his private investigation. He never filed them because, well, you'll see why. Emma carefully turned the brittle pages, reading witness accounts from nearly a century ago. One statement from a farmer named Clyde Wilson caught her attention. "I was coming home late from town when I saw him standing at the edge of the Blackwood property. Must have been 7 feet tall, thin as a rail. Thought he was a man at first, but when he turned, God help me, his face wasn't right, stretched all wrong, and his fingers, long like twigs, reaching out toward the house. I blinked and he was gone. Didn't report it officially because who'd believe such a thing, but a week later, the Blackwood girl went missing." Attached to the statement was a crude drawing. A tall, impossibly thin figure with elongated limbs and a distorted face, standing beneath a tree. It matched exactly what Emma had seen in the digitized photograph. "There's more," Howard said quietly, sliding over a manila envelope. "These were found in various locations where the children disappeared. Inside were 5 faded photographs, each showing a small handprint pressed into soil or dust, except they weren't quite handprints. The fingers were too long, too thin, the palm too narrow to be human. My grandfather had a theory," Howard continued. "He believed whatever took those children wasn't human, that it had been in cold water for years, maybe centuries, taking children periodically. Native American legends from this area speak of a long man who stole children who wandered too far from their villages." Emma stared at the strange handprints, her mouth dry. "Why did the disappearances stop in 1929? Howard's expression darkened. "That's where the story gets stranger. In August 1929, Sarah Blackwood, your ancestor, was found wandering the forest 10 miles from town, covered in blood that wasn't hers. She was clutching a child's shoe, Ruth's shoe. She never spoke another word about what happened, but the disappearances stopped after that day." On the drive back to her grandmother's farm, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. As she passed the old oak tree at the edge of the property, she glanced up, and for a split second thought she saw a tall, thin shadow among the branches, watching her with hollow eyes. "Grandma," Emma said that evening, spreading Howard's documents across the kitchen table, "did you know about the other missing children? Or about Sarah being found in the woods?" Margaret nodded slowly, her eyes distant. "There were whispers. My mother wouldn't speak of it directly, but I overheard things as a child. Sarah spent her final years in this house, you know. My mother cared for her. She, Sarah, would scream in her sleep sometimes, and she refused to go near the cellar." "The cellar?" Emma asked, looking toward the door that led to the old root cellar beneath the house. "Why?" "I don't know. Mother kept it locked after Sarah died. Said it was unsafe, the stairs too steep. I haven't been down there in 50 years. Emma's gaze fixed on the heavy wooden door beside the pantry. "Do you have the key?" Margaret hesitated before rising slowly from her chair. She retrieved a small wooden box from a high kitchen shelf and opened it to reveal an iron key, dark with age. "I've always kept it, though I never knew why. Something told me it might be important someday." The key turned stiffly in the lock, the mechanism protesting after decades of disuse. The door swung open with a groan, revealing a set of steep wooden stairs descending into darkness. Emma switched on her phone's flashlight and took the first step down, the wood creaking beneath her weight. "Be careful," Margaret called from the doorway, unwilling to follow. The cellar air was cold and damp, carrying the musty scent of earth and decay. Emma's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing stone walls glistening with moisture and a dirt floor packed hard by time. Old preserving jars lined rough wooden shelves, their contents long since turned to dust. At first glance, the cellar appeared ordinary, until Emma's light passed over the far wall. Unlike the other 3 walls made of fitted stone, this one was bare earth, and in the center was a crude door fashioned from ancient wooden planks bound with rusted iron bands. "Grandma," Emma called up the stairs, "did you know there's another door down here?" "What?" "No, that's not possible. The cellar's just one room." Emma approached the earthen wall, her flashlight illuminating what appeared to be symbols carved into the wooden door, strange angular markings that resembled no language she recognized. The door had no visible handle or lock, but as she drew closer, she noticed something else. 5 small handprints pressed into the earth around the doorframe. Not human handprints. The fingers were too long, too thin. With trembling fingers, Emma reached out and touched one of the strange symbols on the door. The wood felt warm beneath her fingers, despite the cellar's chill. As her skin made contact, a whisper seemed to rise from the earth itself. A child's voice, distant but clear. "The tall man is hungry. He says you can join us too." Emma jerked her hand away, heart pounding. In the same instant, her flashlight flickered and died, plunging the cellar into absolute darkness. From behind the wooden door came a soft scratching sound, like long fingernails dragging slowly across wood. "Emma!" Margaret called from above. "Are you all right? Come back up there." Emma backed away from the door, feeling her way toward the stairs. As she retreated, her flashlight suddenly came back to life, illuminating the earthen wall one last time. The wooden door was now ajar, open just a crack, and through that narrow space, a single pale, elongated finger was visible, beckoning. Emma fled up the stairs, slamming the cellar door behind her and turning the key in the lock with shaking hands. "We need to leave," she gasped to her grandmother. "Now!" As they hurried to pack overnight bags, Emma glanced out the kitchen window toward the old oak tree. Standing beneath its spreading branches was a tall, impossibly thin figure, its face hidden in shadow. And beside it stood a small child in old-fashioned clothing, holding its hand. The child raised her free hand in a wave. In that moment, Emma knew with terrible certainty that she was looking at Ruth, forever 3 years old, forever held in the grasp of the thing that had taken her nearly a century ago. Emma and Margaret checked into the Coldwater Inn, a small bed and breakfast on the edge of town. Neither woman wanted to spend another night at the farmhouse, not after what Emma had seen in the cellar. That evening, they met Howard Jensen in the inn's quiet dining room to discuss his grandfather's investigation and the local legends surrounding the disappearances. The Osage people who originally inhabited this region had stories about a creature they called Michatushka, the Long One, Howard explained, spreading out photocopies of his grandfather's notes. According to their legends, it lived in the spaces between trees and could open doorways to another place, a place where it kept the children it stole. "That matches what I saw in the cellar," Emma said, her voice low. "There was a door in the earth wall. It shouldn't have been there, structurally impossible, but it was." Howard nodded grimly. "My grandfather interviewed an Osage elder in 1929 after Sarah was found. The elder told him the Long One could only be stopped by a mother's sacrifice. The notes aren't clear on what that means, but after Sarah was found covered in blood in the woods, the disappearances stopped." "Did Sarah kill it?" Margaret asked, her hands clutching her teacup tightly. "I don't think so," Howard replied. "The elder said the creature couldn't be killed, only contained, bound, and the binding had to be renewed." Emma felt a cold realization washing over her. When was the last binding, according to the legend? Howard consulted his notes. The elder mentioned cycles of 98 years. Emma and Margaret exchanged alarmed glances. "It's been 98 years since 1927, Emma whispered. Howard's face paled. "There's more. My grandfather wrote that the creature was drawn to bloodlines it had marked. Once it chose a family, it would return for more children from that same line." "But I don't have children," Emma said. "No," Howard agreed, "but you're of Sarah's bloodline, and you've seen it now, acknowledged it. According to the legend, that's enough to draw its attention." As if summoned by their conversation, the lights in the dining room flickered, plunging them momentarily into darkness. When the power returned, Emma noticed a tall shadow pass by the window outside, too tall and too thin to be human. "It's watching us," she murmured. That night, Emma dreamed of the cellar door. In her dream, she descended the stairs alone, drawn by a child's soft singing. The wooden door in the earth wall stood open, revealing not darkness, but a twilit forest of impossibly tall, thin trees. Among them moved shadows, elongated figures with stretched limbs and hollow eyes. At the edge of this nightmare forest stood Ruth, still 3 years old, her small hand held in the grasp of the tallest shadow. "He's hungry again," Dream Ruth said, her voice echoing strangely. "He says it's time for another Blackwood child." Emma woke, gasping, sheets tangled around her legs, the dream still vivid in her mind. Across the room, her laptop screen glowed with an image she hadn't left open. The digitized photograph from 1927 zoomed in on the spectral figure behind Ruth. As Emma watched in horror, the figure in the photograph slowly turned its head to look directly at her through the screen. The next morning, Emma returned to the Historical Society while Margaret rested at the inn. She needed to understand what Sarah had done to stop the creature, to bind it for nearly a century. In the archives, Emma discovered Sarah's medical records from after her institutionalization. The attending physician had noted strange scars on Sarah's palms, 5 puncture wounds on each hand that never fully healed. With them was a sealed envelope marked "Patient's Personal Effects, to be destroyed." Inside, Emma found a small leather pouch containing 5 teeth, too small to be adult teeth, but oddly shaped, sharp and curved like tiny fangs. Attached was a note in Sarah's handwriting: "For the next binding, blood of the bloodline freely given. 5 teeth for 5 children. The door must be sealed again when he wakes." Emma spent the afternoon researching the Osage legends about Michatushka, cross-referencing them with Sarah's journal and the teeth found among her belongings. The pieces were beginning to fit together, forming a disturbing picture. According to the legends, the creature fed on children once every century, taking 5 before returning to its slumber. It could be bound by a ritual requiring the blood of someone from a marked bloodline and 5 teeth, the creature's own teeth, pulled during its feeding cycle. Sarah had somehow managed to obtain these teeth, perhaps during her mysterious encounter in the woods when she was found covered in blood. Emma called Howard, who arrived at the inn with additional files, birth and death records from Coldwater, dating back to the 1820s. "Look at this," he said, spreading the documents across the table. "I found records of 5 children disappearing between 1824 and 1829, and again between 1726 and 1731, according to church records from the early settlement. Always 5 children, always over a period of a few years, and always stopping suddenly." "The 98-year cycle," Emma murmured. "Yes, but there's more," Howard continued. "I tracked the families of the victims. In each cycle, at least one child came from the same bloodline, your bloodline, the Blackwoods. Your ancestors were among the first settlers here, and in every cycle, the creature has taken at least one Blackwood child." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. "So it's not just returning to Coldwater, it's specifically coming back for my family. And according to the legend," Howard added grimly, "only blood from the marked family can bind it again." That evening, as Emma and Margaret ate dinner in their room, away from windows and prying eyes, Emma's phone rang. It was Mrs. Peterson, the elderly neighbor who was checking on Margaret's house while they were away. "Emma, dear, I'm sorry to bother you, but there's something strange happening at your grandmother's house," Mrs. Peterson said, her voice tense. "The lights keep turning on and off, and I swear I heard a child laughing inside, though I know there aren't any children there." "Mrs. Peterson, don't go inside the house," Emma said urgently. "Stay away from it, especially after dark." "Too late, dear. I already checked inside earlier. Everything seemed normal except—" Her voice trailed off. "Except what?" "The cellar door was open. I know Margaret always keeps it locked. She has for as long as I've known her, but it was standing wide open, and there were footprints in the dust. Small ones like a child's leading down the stairs." After hanging up, Emma turned to her grandmother. We have to go back to the house, tonight. It's opening the door again, and we need to close it before it takes another child. Margaret nodded slowly, her face pale but determined. Sarah bounded once. We can do it again. As they drove back to the farmhouse in the gathering dusk, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that they were being drawn into a trap, that the creature wanted them to return. Yet what choice did they have? If the legends were true, the binding was weakening, and soon the creature would be free to take more children. The old farmhouse loomed dark against the twilight sky as they pulled into the driveway. The ancient oak tree at the property's edge seemed to reach toward them with gnarled branches, its leaves whispering in a wind that touched nothing else. "It knows we're here," Margaret whispered as they approached the front door. "It's been waiting for us." Inside, the house was cold and still, shadows gathering in the corners despite the lamps they switched on. The cellar door stood open, just as Mrs. Peterson had reported, a rectangle of perfect darkness at the top of the stairs. From below came the soft sound of a child humming a lullaby. Emma stood at the top of the cellar stairs, the iron key clutched in one hand, and Sarah's leather pouch containing the 5 strange teeth in the other. Margaret waited in the kitchen, unable to descend the steep steps with her arthritic knees, but unwilling to leave Emma to face the darkness alone. "Be careful," Margaret whispered. "Remember what Sarah wrote, blood freely given. Don't let it take from you. You must give willingly." Emma nodded, her throat too dry for words. She switched on her flashlight and began to descend, each step creaking beneath her weight. The humming grew louder as she reached the bottom, a child's voice singing a song from another time. The cellar looked different now. The preserving jars had been shattered, their contents spilled across the dirt floor. The wooden shelves were splintered, as if something with immense strength had torn through them. And the earthen wall at the far end now contained not just one door, but 5 identical wooden doors arranged in a semicircle, each carved with strange symbols that seemed to writhe and shift in the flashlight beam. Standing before the central door was a small figure in an old-fashioned dress, a little girl with dark hair, tied in ribbons, her back to Emma. "Ruth," Emma called, her voice barely above a whisper. The child turned slowly. It had Ruth's face, the same face Emma had seen in dozens of family photographs, but her eyes were wrong. Too dark, too empty, like holes punched into reality. "He's waiting for you," the child said, her voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "He's been waiting a long time for another Blackwood." "What does he want from me?" Emma asked, taking a step closer. Ruth smiled, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too numerous. "The same thing he wanted from great-great-grandmother Sarah. A binding, a promise, blood and teeth to keep him satisfied. And if I refuse, then he takes what he wants anyway, 5 more children, starting with any child with Blackwood blood." Emma thought of her cousin's children, of the generations that would follow. "And if I agree, what happens then? Another 98 years of sleep, another cycle before he wakes hungry again." From behind the 5 doors came a scratching sound, long fingers dragging across wood, eager to break through. "Show me," Emma demanded, her voice stronger now. "I want to see what I'm binding." Ruth's smile widened impossibly, stretching beyond the confines of her small face. "As you wish." The 5 doors swung open simultaneously, revealing not rooms or passages, but windows into someplace else, a twilit forest of impossibly tall, thin trees, their trunks pale as bleached bone. Among them moved shadows, elongated and distorted, with limbs that bent at unnatural angles. From the central doorway emerged a figure that had to crouch to fit through the opening. It unfolded itself in the cellar, growing taller until its head nearly touched the ceiling beams. A gaunt, emaciated form with skin like parchment, stretched over a frame of twisted wire. Its face was a parody of humanity, features stretched and distorted, mouth a black slash that opened to reveal rows of needle-like teeth. Its eyes, though, its eyes were the worst part. Not empty like Ruth's, but ancient and hungry and aware, filled with a malevolent intelligence that had watched humanity for centuries. "You know me now, Emma Blackwood," it said, its voice a dry whisper like dead leaves skittering across stone. "As your ancestor knew me, as all Blackwoods must come to know me, in time." It extended one skeletal hand, fingers impossibly long and tipped with curved black nails. "Will you bind me as she did? Blood freely given, teeth returned to their rightful place?" Emma clutched the leather pouch tightly. "If I do this, you'll leave the children alone. For another 98 years. The creature's mouth stretched in what might have been a smile. "A binding is a binding. I am bound by older laws than yours." Emma removed the 5 teeth from the pouch. They seemed to pulse in her palm, warm and somehow alive. "What do I do?" "Place them in the door. One for each child I've taken, and seal them with your blood, freely given, not taken." Emma approached the central door, now standing open to that impossible twilit forest. Within the weathered wood were 5 small hollows, perfectly sized for the teeth she held. As she placed the first tooth into its hollow, a child's scream echoed from somewhere deep in the forest beyond the door, a sound of such anguish that Emma nearly dropped the remaining teeth. "Ignore them," the creature said, its voice almost gentle now. "They are mine already. You cannot save them. You can only prevent more from joining them." One by one, Emma placed the teeth into the door, each one triggering another cry from the forest depths. When the 5th tooth was in place, the door began to close on its own, the wood seeming to soften and flow around the teeth, securing them in place. "Now the blood," the creature prompted, watching her with those ancient, hungry eyes. Emma removed a small pocket knife from her jeans. With a deep breath, she drew the blade across her palm, opening a shallow cut from which blood welled immediately. "Freely given," she whispered, pressing her bleeding palm against the door, where the teeth now formed a pattern like a constellation. The moment her blood touched the wood, the cellar filled with a sound like 1,000 voices screaming in unison, not in pain, but in rage. The creature contorted, its body twisting unnaturally as it was pulled back toward the doorway. It reached for Emma with those terrible elongated fingers, but some invisible force held it back. 98 years, it hissed as its body began to fold and compress, forced back through the doorway. "And then I return for another Blackwood. The binding must be renewed, always renewed." As the creature disappeared through the door, Ruth's small form lingered a moment longer. Her eyes, briefly, seemed to clear, becoming truly a child's eyes again, filled with fear and confusion. "Help us," she whispered, before she too was pulled back through the doorway. The door slammed shut with such force that the entire house shook. The 5 teeth glowed briefly before becoming indistinguishable from the wood itself, and Emma's blood seemed to sink into the grain, disappearing completely. When it was over, only one door remained in the earthen wall, sealed shut, the strange symbols now still and dormant. Emma stood alone in the cellar, her cut palm throbbing, facing a doorway to nowhere that would remain closed for 98 years. Emma climbed the cellar stairs slowly, exhaustion weighing on her like a physical burden. Margaret was waiting at the top, her face lined with worry. "It's done," Emma said simply, showing her grandmother her bandaged palm. "The binding is renewed. For another 98 years at least." Margaret helped Emma to the kitchen table and poured her a glass of water. "What happened down there? I heard sounds." Emma recounted everything. The 5 doors, Ruth's appearance, the creature itself, and the binding ritual. As she spoke, the weight of what she'd witnessed settled more firmly on her shoulders. "We need to document this," she said finally, "for the next generation. They need to be prepared when the binding weakens again." In the days that followed, Emma created a comprehensive record of everything they'd learned about the creature, the disappearances, and the binding ritual. She included digital copies of Sarah's journal, Howard's grandfather's notes, and the Osage legends. Most importantly, She detailed her own experience in the cellar and the nature of the binding, blood freely given from the Blackwood line, and the 5 teeth returned to their places in the door. Howard helped them research similar legends from around the world, stories of thin, tall beings who stole children, of doorways to other realms hidden in the earth, of bindings that needed to be renewed through generations. The teeth, Howard mused as they compiled their research. You said they seemed alive somehow? Emma nodded, remembering the unsettling warmth of the teeth in her palm. I think they're part of it. Parts it's sacrificed for the binding. That's why the ritual works. It's giving up something of itself. Which means, Margaret added quietly, that somewhere in that place, it's missing those teeth. It's weakened. But not for long, Emma replied. It said 98 years. Then it returns for another Blackwood. A week later, Emma and Margaret returned to their normal lives. The house seemed peaceful now, the cellar door locked once more with the iron key. Emma placed the key in the small wooden box with their compiled research, adding a note that it should be passed down through the family line, along with the knowledge of what waited behind the cellar door. Before leaving Coldwater, Emma visited the local cemetery where generations of Blackwoods were buried. She found Sarah's grave, a simple headstone weathered by nearly a century of Kansas seasons. You did what you had to do, Emma said softly to the stone. And so did I. I just hope they're ready when the time comes again. As summer turned to fall, Emma tried to return to her normal life in Chicago. She went back to her job as a museum archivist, finding a certain irony in preserving history when such a terrible secret was now part of her own family's legacy. Sometimes she woke in the night, her palm aching where she'd cut it for the binding, dreaming of a twilit forest and children's voices calling from among impossibly tall trees. In October, Emma received a call from a cousin she hadn't spoken to in years. Emma, it's Jessica. I had the strangest dream last night and I felt like I needed to call you. I dreamt about our great-great-grandmother's farm, and there was this tall man standing under the oak tree, watching the house, and a little girl was with him. She told me to tell you that 98 years goes by faster than you think. Emma's blood ran cold. Jessica was a Blackwood too, another potential link to the creature when the binding weakened. Listen carefully, Emma said. I need to tell you about our family history, about what waits in the cellar of Grandma Margaret's farmhouse, and what our family will need to do 98 years from now. That night, Emma added another page to her documentation of the binding ritual. At the top, she wrote in bold letters, for the Blackwood who faces the binding in 2025, it knows your bloodline. It has always known. The binding is not just a ritual, it's a promise, a contract renewed through generations, blood freely given, 5 teeth returned to their rightful place, 98 years of safety, paid for with 98 years of waiting. Be ready, be brave. Above all, remember, it must be freely given, or the binding fails. Outside her Chicago apartment, the branches of a maple tree scratched against her bedroom window, driven by an October wind. To anyone else, it might have sounded like nothing more than dry summer 2025 arrived with oppressive heat, as if the sun itself were trying to burn away the shadows that had haunted Emma's dreams for nearly a year. Now back at her grandmother's farmhouse, Emma stood in the kitchen, sorting through Margaret's belongings. The elderly woman had passed away peacefully in her sleep 3 weeks earlier, leaving the property to Emma, along with the burden of knowledge about what lay beneath it. The wooden box containing the iron key sat on the kitchen table, alongside the comprehensive documentation Emma had compiled. She had made copies for every living Blackwood relative, though most had received her warnings with skepticism. Only Jessica, who continued to have dreams about the tall figure and the little girl, fully believed Emma's account of what had happened in the cellar. A knock at the door startled Emma from her thoughts. Howard Jensen stood on the porch, holding a manila envelope. I found something else, he said without preamble as Emma invited him in. County records from 1927. The original farmhouse, the one in the photograph, it wasn't built where this house stands now. Emma frowned. What do you mean? This has always been the Blackwood farm. Howard spread out an old survey map on the kitchen table. The original house was about 100 yards east, closer to the oak tree. It burned down in October 1927, 3 months after Ruth disappeared. Sarah and her husband rebuilt here, farther from the tree. But the cellar door, that's just it, Howard said, his finger tracing the map. According to this, the original house had no cellar. Whatever is beneath this house, whatever door you sealed, it's not part of the original structure. Emma felt a chill despite the summer heat. Are you saying they built the new house deliberately over that door? That Sarah knew it was here? I think she did more than know about it. I think she created it as part of the original binding. That evening, Emma and Howard descended into the cellar together. The space felt different now, the air less oppressive, the shadows less threatening. The earthen wall with its sealed wooden door looked like nothing more than an odd architectural feature. The symbols carved into the wood now faded and still. Howard ran his fingers over the door's surface. It's remarkable craftsmanship, considering it was likely built in a hurry after the original house burned. Not built, Emma corrected, remembering the way the wood had seemed to flow around the teeth during the binding. Created, through the ritual. As they examined the door, Emma noticed something she'd overlooked before, a small compartment built into the stone wall beside it, concealed by shadows. Inside was a leather-bound book much newer than Sarah's journal, its pages filled with Margaret's neat handwriting. She knew, Emma whispered, flipping through the pages. All this time, Grandma knew more than she told me. Margaret's private journal detailed her own experiences with the cellar door, how, as a child, she'd sometimes heard whispers coming from behind it, how her mother had warned her never to enter the cellar alone, and most disturbing of all, how in 1979, 52 years after the original binding, Margaret had found the door ajar one night, with small, wet footprints leading up the stairs and through the house before disappearing. Mother said the binding would last 98 years, Margaret had written. But tonight I realized it doesn't keep it completely contained, only prevents it from taking more children. It tests the boundaries year by year, growing stronger as the binding weakens. The final entry was dated just 1 month before Margaret's death. I feel it watching me now, even when I'm not in the cellar. It knows its time is coming again. I hear Ruth singing sometimes, when the house is quiet. Emma renewed the binding last year, but I fear it was only temporary. A patch, not a true renewal. The creature said 98 years from the original binding, which means 2025, not 2124. I pray I'm wrong, but I've left everything Emma will need, just in case. God forgive me for bringing this burden to another generation. Emma closed the journal, her hands trembling. She thought my binding wouldn't last, that it was only temporary. Howard looked grim. The original binding was in 1927. If Margaret was right, then it's coming back this year, Emma finished. Not in 98 years. Now. As if summoned by her words, a soft scratching sound came from behind the sealed door, like long fingernails dragging slowly across wood. The scratching continued through the night, growing louder as darkness fell. Emma called Jessica, who arrived the next morning with her husband and their 5-year-old daughter, Lily. Emma had been reluctant to involve the child, but Jessica insisted they needed to face this as a family. And besides, strange dreams had been haunting Lily too. She keeps talking about a tall friend who watches her from the trees, Jessica explained quietly, while Lily played in the living room, safely away from the cellar door. And about a little girl named Ruth who wants her to come play. Howard arrived shortly after, with additional research. Old photographs of the original farmhouse, newspaper clippings about the fire that destroyed it, and most valuably, a journal belonging to an Osage medicine man who had assisted Sarah with the original binding. It confirms what we suspected, Howard said, translating the journal's mix of Osage and English. The binding must be renewed by Blackwood blood when the Long One grows strong again. But here's the critical part. The renewal must happen at the original site of emergence, not at the door created to bind it. The original site? Emma asked. Where's that? According to this, beneath the oldest tree on the property. All eyes turned toward the window, where the ancient oak stood silhouetted against the afternoon sky. The tree, Jessica whispered. In all my dreams, it's always standing beneath that tree. As dusk approached, they prepared for what they hoped would be the final binding. Using the medicine man's journal as a guide, they gathered the necessary items. The 5 teeth, which Emma had carefully removed from the cellar door, a silver bowl purchased from an antique store in town, bundles of sage and sweetgrass, and a knife with a bone handle that Howard had located in the Historical Society's collection. It must be blood, freely given from all remaining members of the marked bloodline, Howard read from the journal. Combined and offered at the roots of the emergence tree as the sun crosses the threshold tonight. Emma looked at Jessica, understanding passing between them. Both of us, Emma said, our blood together. Jessica nodded. For Lily, for all the children. They waited until the sun hung low on the horizon, painting the Kansas sky in shades of crimson and gold. The scratching from the cellar had grown so loud that it echoed through the entire house, and the temperature had dropped despite the summer heat, their breath visible in the unnaturally cold air. Emma, Jessica, Howard, and Jessica's husband Dave formed a protective circle around Lily as they walked toward the ancient oak tree. The child seemed unusually calm, her eyes fixed on the gnarled trunk as if she could see something the adults couldn't. She's there, Lily said suddenly, pointing to a space beside the tree where nothing was visible. Ruth is waiting. She says he's very hungry now. At the base of the oak, they found what they were looking for, a circular depression in the earth, almost like a well that had been filled in long ago. Howard brushed away decades of accumulated soil and leaves to reveal a stone surface carved with the same strange symbols that adorned the cellar door. This is it, he said quietly, the original emergence point. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the horizon, the air around the oak tree seemed to thicken, shadows gathering unnaturally. The wind died completely, leaving an eerie stillness broken only by the distant sound of a child humming a lullaby. Following Howard's translation of the journal, Emma placed the 5 teeth in a circle on the stone surface. Jessica set the silver bowl in the center, and both women knelt before it. Blood freely given, Emma recited, drawing the bone-handled knife across her palm and allowing her blood to drip into the bowl. Not taken. Jessica did the same, her face tense with pain and determination as her blood mingled with Emma's in the silver bowl. The moment their combined blood filled the bowl, the earth beneath them trembled. A low moan seemed to rise from the ground itself, and the oak tree's branches thrashed violently despite the still air. It's fighting the binding, Howard warned, consulting the journal frantically. You need to complete the ritual quickly. Emma lifted the bowl and poured their mixed blood over the 5 teeth arranged on the stone. As the blood touched the teeth, they began to glow with an unnatural light, and the stone surface beneath them cracked open like an eggshell. From the widening crack emerged a skeletal hand, impossibly large, with elongated fingers tipped with curved black nails. It grasped the edge of the opening, pulling itself upward as the crack expanded to reveal the creature's emaciated form, unfolding from beneath the earth. "You cannot bind me again," it hissed, its voice like dry leaves skittering across stone. "The child is already marked, mine by right." Its hollow eyes fixed on Lily, who stood transfixed, staring back without fear. "No," Emma said firmly, stepping between the creature and the child. "We've completed the ritual, blood freely given from the bloodline. Your teeth returned, the binding is renewed." The creature's mouth stretched in a terrible parody of a smile, revealing rows of needle-like teeth with 5 conspicuous gaps. The binding is incomplete. It requires sacrifice beyond blood. Sarah knew this. She paid the price willingly. What sacrifice? Jessica demanded, pulling Lily closer to her. A guardian, the creature whispered. One to watch the door for 98 years. Sarah remained to ensure the binding held. Now another must take her place. Emma and Jessica exchanged glances, understanding dawning in their eyes. Margaret had known, had served as guardian after Sarah's death. And now, with Margaret gone, the binding was weakening. "I'll do it," Emma said without hesitation. "I'll be the guardian." The creature studied her with those ancient, hungry eyes. "Freely given. You will remain here, watching the door, ensuring no child strays too close. For 98 years until the next binding." "Yes," Emma replied, "if you promise no more children will be taken, no more Blackwoods marked." "A binding is a binding," the creature intoned. "I am bound by older laws than yours." It extended one skeletal hand, offering something small and white, a tooth, freshly grown to replace one of those used in the binding. "The final seal. Take it freely, and the binding is complete." Emma reached out and took the tooth, its surface warm and pulsing slightly against her palm. As her fingers closed around it, the creature began to fold in on itself, its impossible form compressing and distorting as it was drawn back into the crack beneath the oak tree. 98 years, it whispered as it disappeared. "I will sleep, and you will watch." The crack sealed itself, the stone surface becoming whole once more, though the 5 teeth and the blood remained visible, a permanent reminder of the binding. Ruth's ghostly form appeared briefly beside the tree, her eyes clear and sad. "Thank you," she whispered before fading away like morning mist. In the days that followed, Emma made arrangements to move permanently into her grandmother's farmhouse. Jessica and her family returned to their home in Denver, with promises to visit regularly and to preserve the knowledge of the binding for future generations. Howard helped Emma create a comprehensive record of everything they'd learned, to be stored alongside Margaret's journal and the iron key in the wooden box. They placed the box in a fireproof safe in the cellar, positioned where the guardian could always keep watch over it, and over the sealed door in the earthen wall. On her first night alone in the house as its official guardian, Emma sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, contemplating the 98 years that stretched before her. She would grow old in this house, watching over the binding, ensuring no child ever encountered what lurked beneath the oak tree or behind the cellar door. Outside, the ancient oak stood silent against the night sky, its branches still once more. From the cellar came no scratching, no whispers, no child's lullaby, only the peaceful silence of a predator in slumber. Emma touched the small scar on her palm, the mark of blood freely given. "Sleep well," she murmured to the silent house, "for 98 years at least." She knew that somewhere in the future, another Blackwood would stand where she had stood, facing the same choice, making the same sacrifice. The binding would need to be renewed again, the ancient cycle continuing as it had for centuries. But for now, the children were safe, and Emma would watch over them, a guardian at the threshold between worlds, keeper of a door that must never be opened again.